lapel microphone right here. I did test it. I actually did it on the voice memo. So if it's not working right now and you're just seeing my mouth move, it's not my fault. Okay? Anyway, today is iteration number 21. I thought I'd just go live. I have no particular plan other than I have to work on an illustration this morning because I may have a meeting later to discuss the illustration. And it's a project I've been working on for a long time. And to be totally honest, I'm feel like I've finished it, but I haven't quite finished it, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to have to do that. And you're going to have to come with me for this. I'm reading two books at the moment. So what I'm doing with this book, this is Lynn Gamwell, Exploring the Invisible. It's a treatise on art and science. Well, not really. It's actually I'm finding it quite interesting. And what I'm looking for as I read it, it's sort of looking at the cultural context and how the thinking in art emerged and what the scientific thinking was at the time and how that was reflected in the art. So it's actually quite a beautiful book. I'm finding it quite, I think deep is the word, because it's got a lot of philosophical musings, just been reading about the French, and how, interestingly enough, this is, because I'm always thinking about things in the context of measurement, how the French didn't take to Darwinism, didn't take the ideas of Darwinism, and even the ideas that preceded Darwinism, Lamarck's ideas, which both, even though Lamarck is not obviously, Lamarck wasn't the one who was correct, even though the ideas of epigenetics are sort of testing that a little bit, but the idea that you acquire during your lifetime through use of limbs and change, you acquire those characteristics and take them to the next generation. The inheritance of acquired characteristics. That was Lamarck. Darwin just said natural variation in the offspring, whatever variants were fitter in that environment would continue into the next generation, would be fitter, essentially, just to put it very simply. French didn't like that, and it was the start of something where there was a little bit of a break between philosophy and science, where the scientists became increasingly mistrustful of speculation and philosophical underpinnings, wanted to just measure, all right? They wanted just to measure. It's a little bit, I think, Aristotelian to some extent. You understand your world by observing it. That sort of got a bit extreme when philosophers such as Mach became dominant in Germany. This was in Germany towards the end of the 19th century, where it was purely, if it's not observable, it's not even real, it's not even true, you can't even speculate. It's not valid. So it became quite extreme to the point where one of my scientific heroes, Ludwig von Boltzmann, who developed a lot of the ideas that underpinned thermodynamics, very simply, just like pressure and temperature was somehow influenced by tiny little particles bouncing around inside. That's how he thought about it. Inside containers in random motion generated heat, generated pressure. And he calculated a lot of the physics and the maths behind that and said this would explain a lot of phenomena that you see. But you couldn't see these particles. So Mach undermined those ideas to the point where Boltzmann essentially was discredited for being correct, because it was that very strong philosophical underpinning that if you can't observe it, it doesn't exist. All right. So he was in favor of those ideas. Cuvier, and this is again what I'm picking up from the book. Cuvier, the great French biologist or scientist, again of the 19th century, undermined vitriolically the ideas of Darwin and Lamarck. at least Lamarck, I think he was a bit before Darwin, saying if it's not observable, we're just not interested. That reached its zenith in the 20th century with quantum mechanics, where, Richard Feynman's famous statement, shut up and calculate. Don't want to hear about your ideas of what this might be. Look how well it works. Look what the measurements tell us. So measurement has a lot to do with defining how we go into the world. And I'm really interested in the context of measurement, in what it says about us, what it says about what it allows us to say about our world. I think it's a very rich area of exploration and something that I try and use. So whenever I'm doing anything, I try and have underneath this idea that we are measuring something, and what does that say about who we are? Where does that come from? And at its most fundamental level, I have this sort of working hypothesis that sits underneath the work that I'm going into right now. That especially myself and a lot of my contemporaries, we've emerged in the Judeo-Christian zeitgeist, and somehow all of our thoughts are embedded in ideas originating in that bedrock. There's a great quotation, and I don't know who said this, but all that science is a domestication of religion. So religion is the ultimate hypothesis. It's like there's a God who made all of this, and then people come along and test that. They test the various aspects of what that hypothesis would lead to, and then you realize, oh, it's a refinement. We can't necessarily just go and say, well, God didn't make this cup, did he? And let's test that. So but it's where we start from. It's where we start our thinking from, and that has consequences. Now, so that just sits underneath everything I do. The other book I'm reading it because a friend of mine sent this to me many years ago. And for some reason, it's popping up in conversations I'm having with people, or my father-in-law has just been visiting. He mentioned that the rabbi who married me, not my wife and I, to be technically correct, was trained by this author, Joseph Soloveitchik, very famous rabbinical scholar. And so I've just been compelled to pick up this book and just open it where possible. And I realized when I did that last night, you can't just open it where possible. It's so dense that you have to start from the beginning. So just for the hell of it, I'm going to read, and I haven't read it yet, the first paragraph. The nature of the dilemma can be stated in a 3-word sentence. I am lonely. Let me emphasize, however, that by stating I am lonely, I do not intend to convey to you the impression that I am alone. I thank God, do enjoy the love and friendship of many. I meet people, talk, preach, argue, reason. I'm surrounded by comrades and acquaintances. And yet, companionship and friendship do not alleviate the passional experience of loneliness which trails me constantly. I am lonely because at times I feel rejected and thrust away by everybody, not excluding my most intimate friends, and the words of the psalmist, my father and my mother have forsaken me, ring quite often in my ears like the plaintive cooing of the turtle dove. It is a strange, alas, absurd experience, engendering sharp, enervating pain as well as a stimulating, cathartic feeling. I despair because I am lonely and hence I feel frustrated. On the other hand, I also feel invigorated because this very experience of loneliness presses everything in me into the service of God. In my desolate, howling solitude, I experience a growing awareness that, to paraphrase Plotinus's apothegm about prayer, this service to which I, a lonely and solitary individual, am committed is wanted and gracefully accepted by God in his transcendental loneliness, and numinous solitude. Right. It reminds me of another book I read, We Are All Alone, ironically given to us by a family friend for my engagement present. We Die Alone was the name of the book, which I thought was okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, possibly true, but is that how you want to send me off? Very interesting. The only thing that sort of sparked when I read that is the idea of service and doing actions as a form of humbling before something, surrendering yourself to something larger than yourself. Like Bob Dylan says, you got to serve somebody, and to some extent, in our current world, we tend to serve ourselves, and I don't know if that's healthy. So perhaps, don't know what generated the prevailing zeitgeist of all this thinking, but it's the idea that the work that I can do is not to serve myself. It's not in the service of myself. It's in the service of something higher, whether that's a God, whether that is God, whether that is a community, whether that is, it's not about me. It's about a communication. It really is. It's about reaching. About reaching into community, about reaching people, reaching something above me, beyond me. So that's not a bad thing to take from this. It's not a bad thing. Sorry. OJ, have you said good morning? I won't say too much about the illustration project because I will need to check with the person who commissioned me whether it's something she's open for me to be discussing in this context. So I'm just going to take it out for now. And I mean, it's an interesting process. I could talk about the process of illustration because I'm not an illustrator. And what I mean by that is I don't think I'm naturally, well, I'm illustrating, so I must be an illustrator. But it's a difficult process because my instinct is just to work and to not strive for explanation in my drawings. I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for some kind of story to emerge on its own terms. And with illustration, you're working to a brief. You're obliged to draw in a sense that tells a story that the person who's commissioned you is wanting to tell. So it's a very challenging process for me. Not necessarily something. I'll just say this about it. If I'm going to do any kind of project, it's a project like this. The most important thing is that the person that I'm doing it for is somebody I admire and trust and have a lot of respect for. Otherwise, I couldn't do it because it's so collaborative. The way I work is I'll draw something, I'll send it to the author, and she will give me quite specific feedback, and then I must attend to that feedback. And then there's a bit of give and take. A bit of like I'll say whether I think this feedback is valid or challenge it to some extent. But at the end of the day, it's not my it's I'm doing the drawing for somebody, so it's very hard. I find the process really challenging. But having said that, I think it has pushed me in certain directions that I ordinarily wouldn't have gone to. Is that good? I don't know at this stage. I actually don't know. So time will tell. Time will tell. So this is now the 21st iteration of the process. I mean, we've technically got 9 more. And then we'll see what happens after that. Will I continue with it? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure in some context I will continue it because I think I'm still very interested in it. In this way of working. So I'm sure we'll continue with it. And to be totally honest, I actually really just enjoy talking to you, whoever you are. I really enjoy it. It's like, it seems slightly less bad than just talking to myself, which is essentially what I'm doing, right? It's essentially what I'm doing. But at least this way, when you're talking to yourself, much frowning can occur from the outside world. This way, I can just say, well, I've got a camera on, so I'm clearly not talking to myself. I'm talking to somebody. So that's good, right? And, stream of consciousness, why not? I mean, why not hear all the contents of my brain as they drop out, It's, I mean, who wouldn't want to hear that? Who wouldn't want to hear that? So, yeah, that is the way it is. And I'm here. So that's where am I? Yeah. All right. I'm carrying on with the sketching, but I might as well tell you other things that have sort of occurred and unfolded as the days gone by. Give me 1 sec. I'm coming back. Sorry. Yes. For kids? No, for me. Yeah. What's that? Where are you working? Oh, in the studio. A studio? Yeah. Okay, this one. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. So I don't know if you heard that. Um, I think we have a cleaner who does, I think, wonder what it is that I do when I come here. And so walking out with the books, she wondered why I had the books. I thought, well, she said, are they for the children? No, they're for me. The books are for me. Anyway, what I wanted to say was, so one of the things that I've been working on for the last 6 to 8 months, actually, but I have left it for about 6 months, is one of the projects that is a bit of a cybernetic project, I think you could say. It's definitely an interest of mine that's sort of starting to kind of take form. But again, in that idea that don't force anything to take form until it's ready to take form. But yeah, I basically did an experiment with a physicist colleague of mine, a colleague friend, Matt. I wonder if that's you, the one person that's watching, where I got him, thought we'd do an experiment. Like, see what I was talking about earlier about measurement? This idea that we measure things to understand things. I thought, what happens if I take a physicist as if it was an object, got him to interact with my machine, and then literally see what happens? Can we measure what happens? And then take it one step further. Can we then take those ideas and publish them in a scientific journal, right? That is the action, right? I mean, it's there's a level of I think you could say it's the idea of also challenging the notion of what science is. You know, like science is measurement, science is this is kind of an artistic intervention because, for want of a better word, that is what I am. I'm an artist. And I'm not diminishing myself. I'm a little uncomfortable with the word artist because, you know, it is limiting in its own right. So, but one of the things that I am is an artist. And I thought, well, I'm always asking questions at the interface of art and science, challenging those boundaries. An interesting way to challenge a boundary is to see if you can convince a scientific community to accept the work that you do as an artist as science. It's a simple question, really. So we are in the process of writing this up as a scientific science, and quotation marks are not meant to diminish it or disparage it, but it is saying we are in an interesting space here between art and science, and the artwork. Let's say the work is to see if we can publish that, or at least challenge the scientific community in some sense. I feel like this is a long-term project, and I've written the paper, and I think the most, for me, the thing that I found so fascinating about it, and it's a bit like what I was speaking about yesterday about the peg, is that you can make a machine. There are two kinds of machines in the world, all right, as far as I'm concerned. There's a machine like this, all right? We all recognize that, a toaster, okay? It's teleological, right? This thing is a purpose, right? You most of the time, and I've put the entrance to my studio, because I don't want it to ever toast bread again. In fact, it can't toast bread because I used it as a hammer the other day, and it damaged the one half of it, right? So only half of it toasts, the other half actually can't toast anymore. So I've undermined it. I don't know what it can do, but it can't toast. So I'm already more interested in this as an object than I was 2 weeks ago when it could toast. Much more boring object then. Don't know what it's going to do, but I think it's going to do something. Who knows? Might even, because one of my projects is, I don't know, digital, right? There's some competition out there. They want to see if you can make something digital, a digital artwork. So, well, could I toast a iPad? Is that something one could do? I don't know. It's more interesting than toasting bread. I don't know what it is, but it is more interesting than toasting bread. That's all I know. All right, so that's some speculation at this point. All right. But anyway, what became really clear is that my machine, my Evolver machine, because it's not teleological, it doesn't have a defined behavior. It just behaves. It therefore invites, I think, potentially, this is a hypothesis, more interesting behaviors in the person interacting with it, changing them and changing what it is. Because its behaviors are not predictable, or they're not defined. So then you're trying to kind of figure out what is its behavior then, and then it affects your behavior. That was the actual what we saw in the study, and I'm gonna continue to edit that paper, because I think Matt does have an interest. I know he does. He said to me, "What's happening with the paper?" And I thought I had actually kind of put it a bit on the back burner because I'm still trying to figure out what its central question is. And I think we have to make its central question around the idea of measurement. We did a live podcast where we tried to discuss the paper, So it's an ongoing concern, and it's coming back into my thinking. And I think I need to frame it more around the idea of what it means to measure anything. What can we actually learn about something by measuring it? Some things are not measurable. And there was a memorable quote in the podcast that we did. Is it the idea that if something is not measurable, does that make it less important? And it kind of does in the sciences. If you can't measure it, it's not important because you can't measure it. And somehow has to become a big part of what this discussion is. If we say something important, say something interesting. I don't like the word important. It's a bit self-aggrandizing, but something interesting. I definitely want to say something. I always want to say something interesting. Otherwise, well, I don't want to say anything boring. You see, I'm terrified of boring people. I don't want to do that. So it's got to be interesting. That's the other side of it. So that's the study. That's the experiment we're going to be doing. Keep an eye for that toaster. I think it could be up to something really interesting. And then I'll just share this with you. So as part of otherwise known as artificial eye, I should actually put a link to the animation here because there's a nice animation with this. But now I'm trying to see what the physics of it is. What is the maths of that motion? The maths of that motion. So a drawing I'm currently working on is trying to develop some of the maths around the motion of this artificial eye, this artificial me. Again, one thing leading to another. I don't know which is going to get traction, which is not. It's that whole idea, and this is the power of, I think the power of working in this way, in this performative way, where you can't know what's going to get traction. You just have to do. You have to do, and then it'll tell you. The materials will tell you in response if the direction you're going in is interesting. So that you got to trust that. That's a process you absolutely have to trust. Is that you don't know. My brain is not clever enough to decide in advance what is going to be of value. I have to trust these things, right? These things over here, I've got to trust them, that they are going to have the desired motion, to maybe lift that cup or do the right thing. I don't know myself. I've got to hope that as I'm moving around the space, there's a good snag. I bump into a chair that catches, and that chair becomes part of the artwork, right? That's what you've got to hope for. The chair becomes the thing that's interesting, the snag. Or maybe even more interesting than that, I read something from this book here, all right? And I misunderstand it completely. But that misunderstanding leads to a great insight. That is genuinely what interests me the most, is that there's a linearity to knowledge, yes. One piece of knowledge is another. Institutional knowledge tends to be quite linear. You've got your dominant overriding structure with all its thinking in place, and it evolves that way. Or there's this non-linear form of knowledge where you just encounter ideas. They, like genetic particles, interact with each other, mutate, evolve, and make mistakes. There's serendipity, there's chaos, there's anarchy. But in that, new ideas can emerge, new ways of thinking that are beyond the limitations of the brain, of at least my brain, And I'm very, part of my exploration is always to try and find what those limits are, and can I challenge those limits by the stochastic processes that are just inherent in the way the world unfolds. Yeah, that's about it. That's exactly 30 minutes. Thanks for joining.